Flawedcast episode 262. If you're going to Laurel Canyon. The CIA's attempt to control people resulted in the opposite effect, creating the counterculture of the 1960s. Steven Kinzer.
Flawedcast. Get in the arena.
All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all of our esteemed Flawedcast listeners. I want to welcome and thank everybody to a brand new, fun-filled, triggering episode of Flawedcast. Sorry for missing last week. We actually lost power for 2 days, and we were living like 1921 where there was very little power. I had the generator running to keep the sub pump and the freezer, the refrigerator up and running, charging our phones, so on and so forth. So the expenditure of all the electricity that it would take to power the Flawedcast headquarters was not available. So thank you for guys hanging in and looking forward to this week. And I'm flying solo again. We have a couple big episodes on the horizon. I have some guests that I'm prodding to come and join us because I think the subject matter's heavy and I want to get some experts or at least some people that are more versed in the subject matter than I. So look out for those in the next couple of weeks. But we're going to get into the shake and howdy, and then we're going to do another fun conspiratorial, quote-unquote, episode. So want to, once again, welcome and thank everybody. Please share. Please follow, please subscribe, please like the episode, leave a 5-star review. All of that stuff helps more than you know. You can find us anywhere podcasts are. Just search Flawedcast, CLE, Apple, Spotify, Breaker, Anchor.fm. Anywhere podcasts are, once again, just search Flawedcast, CLE. You can find us on the video platform Rumble. That's under Flawed Inc. You can follow us on our Project Mockingbird, social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Getter, Gab, Parler. We are also now under Threads. That is all under Flawed Inc. In the description of this episode, you will find a link to pick up a copy of my book, Smith's Heart of Man Repair Manual, and our email is flawedinccle@gmail.com. Questions, comments, or concerns, send them there. We'll deal with them accordingly. But I've been really looking at a lot of heavy things going on in the world, and some of the episodes that we have on the docket consist of those and grappling with and trying to reason with the larger things that are happening. But I wanted to kind of talk about something a little lighter, especially since it's just me this week. And I want to talk about Laurel Canyon and the 1960s and the birth of the counterculture revolution, if you will, the hippie culture. There's a couple things I think that add some credence to me being able to talk about what we will be discussing. In large, we're going to be talking about musicians and entertainment. And for those of you who are not aware, I was a music journalist. That was my full-time gig. And, I'm also, I would think, somewhat versed in conspiracy theories. So I think this is going to be a perfect marriage. And I've been looking at what we're going to be talking about. It's kind of come across my radar unbeknownst to me. Like I haven't sought this out. I haven't really looked at this information, but I think at the end, hopefully we're going to be able to tie it to a larger scope, a larger plan that we've seen in the last several generations and what we see at play now. However, I do want to talk about Laurel Canyon, which for those of you who don't know, during the mid to late 60s and 70s, it was a weird focal point of a lot of musicians, a lot of entertainers, a lot of people who had a huge hand, generationally speaking, in shaping the culture of the 60s and the 70s and thusly the generations that have followed. And the weird tie-in to MKUltra, a place called Lookout Mountain, which we're going to talk about, a gentleman named Owsley Stanley, who we're going to talk about, and Mind Control, MKUltra on a mass mass control using psychedelics and manipulation of art and culture to impact a generation. And we're going to get into that right now. And I kind of want to set the stage. I want to set the picture for those of you who may not be aware, but during the 1960s, and this was long before my time, so I only look at this through the lens of history and having an appreciation of the art and the culture and everything that kind of came from that. But during the 1960s, there were some really heavy things that were going on, not too dissimilar from these days. There was political assassinations, specifically in America, in regards to JFK and RFK, the assassination of John and Bobby Kennedy. There was the civil rights movement, which we've now are really beginning to learn that it was a communist overthrow of a government, which kind of coincides with what we talk about. But there were pivotal points and pivotal leaders in that movement, primarily Martin Luther King Jr., who many are now discovering completely denied the deity of Christ, which is just mind-altering and mind-boggling to me. And then Malcolm X, who by all accounts was a very devout man to his wife, to his beliefs. So you got these politicians that people actually admired and looked up to at the time that were assassinated. You had these civil rights leaders who were trying to affect change positively, removing the undertows of what was really going on. These people were elevated and lifted up as role models and as people that men and women and young women should ascribe to or subscribe to be. And their assassinations were just, it was like the robbing and the killing of innocence in a large regard. Another thing that really was happening at that time was the beginning of the Vietnam War, where, over 2 million young men were drafted for that war, that police action, if you will. I know it wasn't until recently it was actually declared a war. And in that war, there was 58,220 young American men who gave their last full devotion to their country. And I'm going to get into a little bit of the false flags and the circumstances, oddly enough, through a connection with Laurel Canyon that even had a hand in leading to the deaths of these young men. A couple of things that I want to talk about is the idea that Laurel Canyon attracted a bunch of weird people that had no musical context. They had no musical experience. That very few these people, some of these people were actors. Very few of them had any kind of theater or acting experience or ability. Magically, it didn't happen. They didn't transform into these people that they were meant to be until they gathered in Laurel Canyon. There's this military movie studio called Lookout Mountain. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into all this. But a lot of the work that I've been looking at that I'm going to really be piggybacking off of was compiled by two main sources. The first guy is David McGowan. He published a lot of works. It was called Weird Science Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Convert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. There's some documentaries, there's some books by David McGowan. Fascinating read. It's amazing that this guy was able to tie all these things together. The other gentleman, Tom O'Neill, who wrote a book called Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. And you can't look at Laurel Canyon at the beginning, which we're going to, which I'll thinking about the end, the Cielo Drive with the Manson family murders, Sharon Tate being the most famous one who was murdered, who was married by the pedophile Roman Polanski at the time. And between Dave McGowan's information and Tom O'Neill's information, there's a lot of lines that need to be drawn. But what we're going to specifically be looking at is the content of MKUltra, which we've talked about in many, many episodes in the past, but the idea that the CIA, through psychotropic experimentation and testing, were using it for mind control. We talk a lot about remote viewing, a lot of this real sinister stuff. And the theory is that MKUltra, which was the CIA's actual confirmed illegal program for mind control and psychological research, which included testing LSD, on unwitting individuals. We're going to talk about in the second. But the theory suggests a massive influx of LSD into the counterculture scene that was a deliberate attempt by the CIA to redirect the energy of young people from political protest to drug-induced hedonistic apathy. Many of the most famous musicians from this scene experienced mysterious deaths between 1969 and 1971, which were then theorized as a shutdown of the experiment. So, the three prominent ones were Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, who actually did serve in the military. But to begin to add some credence to this, because you might be thinking, Bill, this is really off the nut. And you might be, but I want to talk about this. And I want to talk about how this affects us now. So I'm just going to go through this list. Follow along, and at some point, you're going to hear a name of someone or a bunch of people that you may have heard of before, but I challenge you to try to look at them in a different light. So right off the top, we got a gentleman named Jim Morrison, who many of you may know was the lead singer of The Doors. Jim's father, George Stephen Morrison, was a U.S. Navy admiral who commanded naval forces during the 1964 Gulf of Tonkin incident, which escalated into the Vietnam War. So Jim Morrison's dad was the naval leader behind the Gulf of Tonkin, which basically was a false flag tricking the United States into war with Vietnam. Jim Morrison's dad was that guy. Here's another name you may or may not recognize, but that is Pamela Corson, who was Jim Morrison's longtime girlfriend. And Pam's father's name was Columbus Corson, who was a highly decorated Navy bombardier and a high-ranking member of the Naval Reserve. Now that's interesting. Here's a name you may recognize, Ray Manzarek, who was the keyboard player for The Doors. He served as an intelligence analyst for the United States Army Security Agency. Interesting. Another guy you may have heard, Robbie Krieger, also from The Doors. His dad, Stuart Krieger, who was a member of the military industrial sector. So literally 3/4 of the members of The Doors and the leader's lover had connections to high-ranking the military-industrial machine at the time. That's just so uncoincidental to me. But there's more. Frank Zappa, his father, worked as a chemist/mathematician for the defense industry, including at the U.S. Army's Edgewood National Chemical Warfare Facility, while his wife's Gail father, his father-in-law, was a high-ranking nuclear weapons physicist. Another guy you may have heard of before, David Crosby, who was in The Byrds. He was also in CNS and CNS&Y. His father, Floyd Crosby, was an acclaimed cinematographer who shot training films and combat footage for the U.S. military during World War II. Stephen Stills, who was part of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, CSNN, or CSNNY, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. He was also a member of Buffalo Springfield. He was raised in a strict military family, Stills spent most of his childhood moving between various military bases in the southern U.S. and Central American countries like Costa Rica, Panama, and El Salvador, while his father worked on government-related projects. Another gentleman here you may know, John Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas, wrote California Dreamin', hugely popular song. His father, Clyde Andrew Phillips, was a retired Marine Corps captain and engineer. Phillips himself attended several military academies, including a brief stint at the U.S. Naval Academy before dropping out to pursue music. Graham Parsons, who's a gentleman, I love his music. He was in The Byrds. He was also part of the Flying Burrito Brothers with Chris Hillman, who was also part of The Byrds. And he had a solo albums before he passed away. The Return of the Grievous Angel and GP are just country rock masterpieces, but he came from an aristocratic Southern family with strong military and political ties. Michael Nesmith from the Monkees, he served in the Air Force, and his mother's liquid paper empire tied her into high-level corporate and defense circles. Peter Tork, also part of the Monkees, he spent time as a childhood on military bases in Berlin, where his father was stationed as a first lieutenant during the Cold War. Jackson Browne, one of my favorite singer-songwriters. He was born in a U.S. military hospital in Heidelberg, Germany, where his father was stationed as a member of the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA. Bertie Leadon, who was the original lead guitarist for the Eagles, his father was Dr. Bernard Leadon Sr., a aerospace physicist involved with missile guidance systems. Joe Walsh from Cleveland, he was a Gold Star son. He was also part of the Eagles. He was also in the James Gang. Now, John Phillips, Mama Cass from the Mamas and the Papas, and Jim Morrison all attended the same high school in the shadow of the Pentagon. It was called George Washington High School, located in Washington, D.C. Now, there's also some famous actors who are involved with this. Let's hit those real quick. Jack Nicholson, many of you know Mr. Nicholson. He served in the California Air National Guard during the Berlin crisis. Peter Fonda, who was the son of the famous actor Henry Fonda, also happened to be a decorated naval intelligence officer and a Bronze Star recipient. Dennis Hopper, who was the son of J. Miller Hopper, who was an operative in the wartime OSS, who once again was the precursor to the CIA. Now, you might be asking yourself, that's a long list of people who had no previous musical knowledge or whereabout or experiences, who all had ties through either themselves or their parents, family ties of military intelligence, military service, military officers, the military industrial complex, and industrial and we would call NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Today, that's the newer term, but they had these ties to these organizations that I have a hard time believing in coincidence. And, the interesting thing when you look at Nicholson, Peter Fonda, and Dennis Hopper, they were all part of the cast of Easy Rider, which was a hugely successful countercultural movie Dennis Hopper produced and directed. So we had to just take a step back and look at pretty much every member of the Doors, half the members of the Monkees, half the members of the Mama and the Papas have ties to military intelligence. Whether it was their family member or whether it was them themselves, it's beyond strange that these people would have gathered in a rather benign, unbeknownst, unpopular area outside of LA suburb to create a musical and a countercultural revolution. It's beyond coincidental to me. So all these people were part of the same neighborhood with backgrounds that connected them to the very institutions the counterculture claimed to resist. Laurel Canyon was supposed to be an organically grown community of artists. Instead, it looked more like a gathering place for the sons and daughters of powerful families, state officials, and military personnel, and that was only the beginning of the mystery. Now, at the top of Laurel Canyon, there was something called Lookout Mountain. It was an Air Force station. It was located at 8935 Wonderland Avenue in Laurel Canyon. It was a 50,000 square foot compound served at a top secret military film studio from 1947 to 1969. It was used by the U.S. Air Force and the Atomic Energy Commission to produce over 6,500 classified films, including footage of nuclear weapon tests and military training videos. During its operational years, the studio was staffed by Hollywood professionals and frequently visited by major stars who held high-level security clearances for undisclosed projects. Residents of the canyon often reported strange activity near the gates of Lookout Mountain, including armed guards, electrified fences, and security patrols. Floodlights left on all night. Industrial traffic from the laboratory was clogging up the streets, and secretive shipments moving in and out of the base. Locals described it as a mysterious, windowless concrete bunker sitting atop of the peaceful, rustic neighborhood. Little do they know of the important work being done inside the military's top secret Hollywood movie studio, and the place was massive. It was so big that it needed 2 underground parking garages, its own helipad, it had a movie theater, and even its own fallout shelter. Low estimates say Lookout Mountain would release over 6,500 films during its 22 years in operation, though the facility's exact catalog of production remains classified. Even today, large portions of its output are locked away in government archives. We do know that many propaganda films were shot there, and that such stars gave their talents to such top secret endeavors. Some of these people include Marilyn Monroe, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Stewart, Bob Hope, Gregory Peck, Walt Disney himself, and director John Ford. For years, speculation has surrounded its role in producing stage footage for major World War operations. Some even claim that the Apollo moon landing footage was filmed there, a rumor which has never been confirmed or disproven. And even claims of some of the nuclear test footage was allegedly filmed there, which I totally buy. I have a hard time believing actually the moon landing itself. There's a lot of hints and allegations of Stanley Kubrick was the one who, after 2001: A Space Odyssey, the U.S. government contracted him to film what we believe to be the moon landing. And the only thing I have to say to that is whether it's the nuclear footage, which it's interesting that everything is obliviated, but the camera keeps rolling. I don't know how that would work. Or even with Neil Armstrong steps out of the capsule for the first time, here's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. How did the guy get out there in the camera to film him before that even happened? Just a lot to think about. Once again, you could look at it as all coincidental. Now, interestingly enough, Jared Leto, who is a popular actor, he's in a band called 30 Seconds to Mars. He is the current owner of Lookout Mountain. He purchased it for approximately $5 million some years ago. It's now his own private residence, but to me, that in itself is enough to make you shake your head and say, I want to add another element to this mystery. Another curious character with deep family and personal ties to the U.S. government and military was a gentleman named Owsley Stanley, the soon-to-be king of acid. He was making his very first batch of high-purity LSD, and he did not make it in San Francisco. His first slab was set up in Los Angeles, just a short drive from Laurel Canyon. August Owsley Stanley, born January 19, 1935, deceased March 12, 2011, was an American-Australian studio engineer and clandestine chemist. He was a key figure in the San Francisco Bay Area hippie movement during the 1960s and played a pivotal role in the decade counterculture. Under the professional name Bear, he was the sound engineer for the Grateful Dead, recording many of the band's live performances. Stanley also developed the Grateful Dead's Wall of Sound, one of the largest mobile sound reinforcement system servers ever constructed. Stanley also helped Robert Thomas design the band's trademark skull logo. Called the Acid King of the Media, Stanley was the first known private individual to manufacture mass quantities of LSD by his own account between 1965 and 1967. Stanley produced at least 500 grams of LSD, accounting to a little more than 5 million doses. He died in a car accident in Australia, where he had taken citizenship in 1996 on March of 2011. Stanley was the son of a political family from Kentucky. His father was a government attorney. His paternal grandfather, Augustus Owsley Stanley, a member of the United States Senate after serving as governor of Kentucky, and in the U.S. House of Representatives, campaigned against prohibition in the 1920s. When he was 15, Owsley spent 15 months as a voluntary psychiatric patient in St. Elizabeth Hospital in Washington, D.C. Without having graduated from high school, he was admitted to the University of Virginia, where he studied engineering for a year. Despite maintaining a 3.4 grade point average with minimal efforts, he dropped out because of his disinclination for slide rules and mechanical drawing. Despite his dearth of formal education, he secured a position as a test engineer with Rocketdyne in Los Angeles. In this capacity, he worked on the SM-64 Navajo supersonic cruise missile. In June of 1956, he enlisted in the United States Air Force as an electronics specialist, serving for 18 months, including stints at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and Edwards Air Force Base rocket engine test facility before being discharged in 1958. During his service, he secured an amateur radio license and a general radio electrophone operator license. Later, inspired by a 1958 performance of the Boschlo Ballet, he studied ballet in Los Angeles, supporting himself for a time as a professional dancer. In 1963, he enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley, where he became involved in the psychoactive drug scene. He dropped out after a semester, took a technical job at KGO-TV, and began producing LSD in a small lab located in his bathroom of a house near campus. His makeshift laboratory was raided by police on February 21st, 1965. He beat the charges and successfully sued for the return of his equipment. The police were looking for methamphetamine but found only LSD, which was not illegal at the time, as its classification as a Schedule I controlled substance in the U.S. did not occur until 1968. Stanley returned to Los Angeles to pursue the production of LSD. He used the Berkeley lab to buy 500 grams of lysergic acid monophyllate, which is the basis of LSD. His first shipment arrived on March 30th, 1965, and he produced 300,000 hits, 270 micrograms each, of LSD by May in 1965. Then he returned to the Bay Area. So what's interesting is you have a guy whose father was a government attorney, his grandfather was a congressman and senator, involved in military information, military practices, who dropped out of high school and then began a career as a student in college, did seemingly well, but lost interest after a little while. And then what I felt was quite interesting is moved to Los Angeles, was inspired by ballet, but also got a job at the Jet Propulsion's laboratory, which we've discussed in previous episodes. Was created by Jack Parsons, who was really good friends with Aleister Crowley, was heavily involved in Luciferic and satanic principles and rituals. They believe they received all of their information about how to create this jet fuel, the certain ingredients, the way to produce it, the jet propulsion engines. They received all this information from demons. That's a fact. You can look that up. That's not my speculation. So you have this gentleman who, with no qualification, gets a job there. He's doing this, he's doing that, and then all of a sudden he cooking LSD and then gets arrested, then sues the government to get all his stuff back. There's no penalties at all. He creates his and perfects his recipe for LSD right in Laurel Canyon, and then he goes up to the San Francisco Bay, and then infamously hooks up with the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, all those guys, and thusly that's when the real psychotropic, the real hippie movement in that regard really takes hold. But the thing that I find just absolutely interesting is you have a convergence all at the same time with all of these people who have these ties to people in intelligence, people in the military, people into the military industrial complex, people to different governmental agencies that converge on this seemingly disregardable town, to whereas the top of this place, Laurel Canyon, there's Lookout Mountain, which is a top secret Air Force studio where movies and propaganda films, potentially a fake Apollo moon landing, the fake nuclear test footage is being filmed. All these propagandas featuring major stars at the time were involved, and they made over 6,500 productions, 6,500 movies within not even 20 years. That's more output than most major movie studios do in their combined history. And you have the convergence of all these people, and you have the birth of LSD, you have the birth of this counterculture movement, this counterculture revolution, which sadly culminates where the book Chaos, which is a fantastic documentary on Netflix entitled Chaos by Tom O'Neill. Great book if you ever get a chance to read it or find it. But basically, it states that MKUltra used LSD for mind-altering experiments so they could control and manipulate people's minds. That's a historical fact. And you see the birth of that here at Laurel Canyon, composing to the theory, at least put out by Tom O'Neill, is that Charles Manson, who had a sordid run-ins and sordid history with law enforcement also, was picked up, released several times, and then somehow acquired LSD. He acquired ins in different entertainment circles. Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys, they recorded some of their music. The Beach Boys ended up stealing and renaming some of Manson's songs for records in the 70s, but which culminates into the Manson family murders. But we see all of these events within a brief period of time that created such a huge impact. Like, we're still feeling the impact today of what happened then. And there was such a pivotal time during the 60s. And up until this time, by all accounts, people were rather straight-laced. There wasn't a lot of chicanery in regards, generally speaking, as to what we understand the popularity of the hippie culture ultimately became, culminating in Woodstock, the Summer of Love, so on and so forth. But that was also the same time when the Manson family basically murdered that utopic dream, if you will. And I find this fascinating. There's so much circumstantial evidence. If you look back and look at the writings of David McGowan and look at some of these documentaries, it's just absolutely fascinating that these people that were so heavily involved in that music scene of that time had such little experience in the musical industry and put in a position literally in the shadow of Lookout Mountain, this military industrial complex, entertainment producing mechanism, the culmination of the creation of a rather odd character by all intents and purposes, Owsley Stanley. And it's the culmination of mass hypnosis, I believe, mass mind control, to whereas we see now, I believe we're really reaping the effects of that era and just mass mind control everywhere. And it's so hard to be cognitive of it at all times. I'm sure I'm even under the impulse or the influence of some of this, but you can look how at this being one of the main genesis points within recent history of hallucinogenic drugs, mind-altering, mind-controlling drugs, governmental, specifically the CIA with the MKUltra experiments, and then popular culture. You have major influencers that were all a part of this machine, and it could just be coincidence. But I don't think it is. And I think there's something there to really look at and really look at what has happened. This is the genesis point to where we are at now, to where it was so subversive, and only in hindsight are you able to look at it kind of being what it is. But now we have satanic rituals being held on center stages at major concerts, major festivals, major award shows being televised, this whole 6-7 phenomenon. It's just, there's so the Jack Paulson's jet propulsion. Like there's these little things that you see and you start to connect the dots, and it really should just make you wonder. It should make you scratch your head and really take a step back at what are we consuming? What are we looking at? What is going on with our culture? Have we been brainwashed? I want to read a verse here. It's from Matthew 24, which is something we talk about frequently. This is 23 to 25. It says that if anyone says to you during the great tribulation, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will appear, and they will provide great signs and wonders so that as to deceive, if possible, even the elect, God's chosen ones. Listen carefully. I have told you in advance. And we see, I believe, a genesis, a beginning of this great deception. Of even to now, we're having military leaders in the U.S. Armed Forces saying, we're bringing Christ's return about. Certainly, the Muslims in Iran believe that. Many of the Jews in Israel believe that their Messiah is coming back, and that all these wars and these rumors of wars, that they're forcing God's hand to return, and it's just a great deception. I just want to provoke thought. I don't have answers. There's really isn't even concrete proof of this. It's circumstantial. I certainly knew about Jim Morrison's father's involvement with the Gulf of Tonkin as far as the false flag, the event, the 9/11, if you will, of that era that got us into the Vietnam War. But as you can see through these other actors, these other musicians, that the ties go a lot deeper, and I believe it's more or less circumstantial. And I believe if we begin to do a little digging around and a little understanding of the people that are influencing us today, the programs, the music, the movies that are influencing us today, we really should just take a step back and inquire of the Lord what his position is on these things. I'm not a legalist. I'm not telling you to do or anything that's against your conscience. If you're not bothered by it, that's between you and the Lord. But I do want to challenge you with thinking I might be off my nut, but there is more than enough evidence that provides more than these people and these movements just happening coincidentally. So I just, like I said, this kind of just fell in my lap. I just have known about these different people, these different events. Certainly Laurel Canyon being such a fan of music, and obviously the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, The Doors, CSNY. So many of these landmark, these super influential groups at the time. Were they all coincidentally gathering in that place? Or were these people actors? Were they trained? Were they assigned there to begin the ruse of tricking generations, even to the point where in the early 60s, you can find propaganda footage of Jim Morrison being straight-laced and, doing advertisements for the school he was attending. And it's just, the footage is out there. The truth is out there. Just search for it. So I just think this is a fun look into things. Once again, if you want to go deeper, check out Dave McGowan. Once again, his work is called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. Look for his writings. There's a lot of documentaries using his information. And then Tom O'Neill, his book Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. It's such a riveting, there's even a documentary of that on Netflix, same thing, called Chaos. It's so riveting, it's so thought-provoking that we have to take a step and look back and to see, was a generation negatively influenced not only by the mind-altering drugs, the governmental experiments, the MKUltra, but also by these secret Luciferian satanic practices, which Owsley Stanley was a part of in one capacity, I don't know, but being a part of Jack Parsons' Jet Propulsion Studio, there is a tie there. There is a direct link and a direct tie there to occult and to occult practices. So when you look at all these in combination, it really makes you wonder. So got some heavier things on the horizon. Not that this was light and fluffy, but I think it was enjoyable. I find this stuff fascinating. Hopefully you do too. Do a deeper dive on some of this stuff if you're interested, but definitely share. Definitely, share this with people and get the conversations flowing. Start praying, start seeking the Lord as far as, are we being misled? Are we being betrayed? Are we being called God's elect? Or the possibility of us being deceived? I'm sure we are. What is the length? What is the depth that we were deceived? And how can we begin to seek and hunger for truth and climb out of that deception? So I just want to thank you guys for tuning in. Once again, please share, please subscribe, please follow, leave a 5-star comment, hit like. All that stuff helps. You can find us anywhere podcasts are. Just search Flawedcast CLE. We're on Apple, Spotify, Breaker, Anchor.fm. You can find us on the video platform Rumble. That's under Flawed Inc. You can find us on the Project Mockingbird social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Getter, Gab, Parler. We are now also on Threads. All that's under Flawed Inc. In the description of this episode, you can pick up a copy of my book, Smith's Heart of Man Repair Manual, and our email is flawedinccle@gmail.com. Questions, comments, or concerns, send them there. Thanks for listening, guys. We will see you next week.